Hello, children, and welcome back. Today, we will begin with our second chapter in English, a synopsis, The Swiss Family Robinson. It was written by Johann David Wyss, who was a Swiss author and clergyman. This novel was first published in the year 1812 in the German language and translated to English 2 years later. This is the summary of the original long story. This is a well-known adventure novel that people of many countries have enjoyed for more than 200 years. It was also made into graphic novels and films. It aims at teaching young people values like self-reliance, determination, love for your family, cooperation, and proper use of resources. This is a fictional story that describes imaginary events and story. So children, let's read the story together. William, Elizabeth, and their children had been traveling in a ship when the ship was caught in a great storm. The other passengers evacuated without them. William and his family, including the young children Fritz, Ernest, Jack, and Franz, were left to survive alone. They weathered the great storm, waiting in the ship's hold. The ship was survived the night, and the family found themselves within sight of a tropical desert island. The next morning, they decided to get to the island they could see beyond the reef. With much effort, they constructed a vessel out of tubs. After they filled the tubs with food and ammunition and all other articles of value they could safely carry, they rowed towards the island. Two dogs from the ship named Turk and Juno swam beside them. The ship's cargo of livestock, guns and powder, carpentry tools, books, a disassembled pinnace and provision had also survived. So children, I'll start with the explanation. In this story, there are 6 characters. William, who is the father, Elizabeth, the mother, and their 4 sons, Fritz, Ernest, Jack, and Franz. So they all were traveling in a ship when it was caught in a storm. All other passengers from the ship were evacuated. It means to remove from a place of danger to a safer place. Without the Robinson family, they were left to survive alone. But anyhow, they survived from the storm that night. But when they saw out of the ship, they found that they can see a tropical island nearby. The next morning, they decided to go beyond the reef. It means a line of rocks or sand near the surface of the sea. With much efforts, they constructed a small boat out of tubs. They filled the tubs with food and all other necessary things that they needed from the ship. They rowed towards the island, and the 2 dogs, Turk and Juno, swam beside them. The ship's livestock like hens, ducks, etc. also survived, along with guns and powder, carpentry tools, books, and parts of small boats also survived. So children, let's read ahead. Over the next few days, William, the father, attached the floatable old kegs to one another and built a bow that curved around them. The family had landed successfully on the island. They set up a tent and softened the floor with armloads of grass. They cut and spread to serve as their beds. They came to a grove of trees. One tree grew what looked like goods on its trunk. The father told Fritz the goods would be excellent bowls and spoons, and they cut them out into various utensils. Children, let's start with the explanation. After a few days of sailing towards the island, William attached floatable old containers to another and built a bow that curved around them. They landed the island successfully. They built a tent and softened the floor by adding a lot of grass on which they could sleep. After that, they came near a group of trees. Then they saw a tree which looked like goods. It means a large fruit that has a hard shell on the tree's trunk. The father told Fritz that they can make bowls and spoons out of the good and cut them into different utensils. So children, let's read the further part of the story. After some days, Elizabeth informed William that she wanted the family to move to a safer place. Their current camp was not only exposed but also very dry and hot. If they built a house up in one of the large trees, they would be safe from jackals. She described a perfect tree for the project, one whose trunk was nearly 40 feet in diameter. The branches were very long and extended straight out from the trunk, making them perfect platforms for a structure. Later, when determining the height of the lowest branches, the father taught the boys geometry and how to use triangles to measure big objects. He measured a defined distance from the trunk. When he calculated angles using several measured rods, determining that the lowest branch was 30 feet off the ground. The men knotted a rope at certain intervals and attached pieces of bamboo in each knot. Thus, they created their ladder. Father returned to the beach and collected driftwood, thinking it would be perfect to build a sledge on runners rather than wheels. Later, they used it to transport materials. So children, let's start with the explanation. A few days later, Elizabeth told William that they should move to a safer place, as their present place or tent is not that strong and as it was very hot there. She said that they could build a house up in one of the large trees, so they would be safe from jackals. Elizabeth found a perfect tree on which they could build their house. The tree's trunk was 40 feet in diameter. The branches were long and straight. Later on, when the father was trying to measure the height of the lowest branches, he taught the boys geometry and how to use triangles. After the calculations, they found out that the lowest branch was 30 feet above the ground. They tied knots on a rope, keeping some space in between, and attached bamboo pieces in each knot. By this, they created a ladder. The father went near the beach and collected driftwood, a wood that is washed into the shore by the action of waves. As this wood would be perfect to build a sledge. Sledge is a land vehicle with a smooth underside for transportation. Children, let's read the further part of the story. Meanwhile, Elizabeth announced that the garden that she had been tending was producing healthy plants. Corn, melons, pumpkins, and cucumbers were already growing. The next day, only the father and Fritz traveled to the woods, exploring and finding such exotic plants as one with waxy fruit from which candles could be made. Fritz discovered a tree exuding a rubbery sap, from which his father exclaimed that they could make boots. Thinking ahead to the next winter, father decided to create a place safe for the elements, a strong storage spot to protect themselves and their belongings. Fritz came up with the idea of a cave. Not finding one, they thought of carving out their own cave in the rock abutting their campsite. On the smooth face of the rock, father marked the dimensions for an opening, and they picked away at the hard surface with their axes, chisels, hammers, and shovels. Over the next several days, the family cut windows in the rocks to allow for cross currents of air and for sunlight to enter the cave. When they had finished, they had 4 rooms, complete with a fireplace. They now had a new winter home. Children, I'll explain this part to you now. So children, now Elizabeth announced that the plants that she was growing in her garden was producing healthy plants like corn, melons, pumpkins, and cucumbers. The next day, the father and Fritz traveled to the forest and found some different plants. One was a waxy fruit from which candles can be made. Fritz found a tree exuding a rubbery sap. Sap means the fluid that comes out from the stem of a plant. So the father said that they could make boots out of them. As the father was thinking about the winter season, he decided to make a safe place to protect themselves and their belongings. So Fritz told that a cave would be the best place. But they did not find any cave. So they started making their own cave by carving out a rock. The father marked the dimension for the opening of the cave, and then they started hitting the rock with their axes, chisels, and all other tools. After making the cave, they cut out windows in the rocks for ventilation. When they completed the rooms, they had 4 rooms in total in the cave with a fireplace. So children, now they had a new home for winter season. So children, with this we stop here for today. We will continue the further part in the next video. Let's have some revision based on what we learned today. In what way is a rock of work of fiction different from a fact file? A work of fiction is a piece of creative imagination, whereas fact file is completely based on reality. Why did mother wish to shift the family to tree house? As the mother wanted the family to move to a safer place, as their current camp was exposed to not only danger but also it was very dry and hot. Third question, how did mother occupy herself while the tree house was being built? As the tree house was being built, the mother kept herself busy with gardening and was now producing healthy plants. Okay children, I hope you understood this part of the story. We'll meet again in the next video. Take care.